So the point of this video is to hopefully quickly go through comparisons of 14 different tactile switches. I am going to start with the Durock Shrimp, which is like a silent version of the T1. And here is what it sounds like. And in terms of a description of the bump, it pretty much starts immediately, and then there's a little bit of give after the bump event ends, but before we bottom out. Pretty big, solid bump. Next up, we've got the strawberry milk tactiles. Here's what they sound like. And in terms of the bump feel, it's a lot smaller than the Durock Shrimps for sure, but it's pretty snappy on the return. So those are kind of nice. Next up, we have the Kiwi tactile switches. Here's what they sound like. And so far, all of these have been stock. In terms of the bump, it starts pretty close to the top as well. It's not quite as big as the Durock Shrimp bump, but it's definitely closer than the strawberry milks. All right, next up we have the Everglide Oreo switches, one of my personal favorites. So here's what those sound like stock. The bump is pretty close to the top. Let me compare it to the Durock Shrimps. Not as close to the top as the Durock Shrimps, but pretty close to the top. And I would say just as sharp. No, maybe sharper. And definitely a snappier return. Yeah, I like those. Let's see. Some more personal faves. This is the SP Star Polaris Purple, which is what the Magic Girl switches were clones of from round 2 of Magic Girl. They made the light and the dark Magic Girl colorways, but they were both this type of switch. So let's hear them stock. And in terms of describing the bump, not quite as snappy as the last, well, definitely the Oreos and the strawberry milks are pretty snappy. This doesn't have as much snap on the return. In terms of the bump, a rounder bump than the strawberry milks. Not quite as big of a bump as the Durock Shrimps. And not as big as the Oreos either. Next up, another personal favorite. These are the Ashkeebs Amethyst switches. And here is what they sound like stock. I can hear a little spring ping in there. I would probably spring swap and film them, but they feel great. In terms of a bump comparison, let's see. Pretty close to the top. Not as big of a bump as the Durock Shrimps. Maybe comparable to the strawberry milks. Let's see. Yeah, not as sharp as the as most of the other ones. It's kind of a more subtle bump. It's still definitely pronounced, but yeah, not quite as big. And then these are the famous Gazzew U4Ts, T for Thock. These are not the U4s that are silent tactiles. These are TheKey, kind of louder tactile switches, and I did donut lube the bottom of each spring. These are not fully stock pieces, but here's what they sound like. And in terms of bump feel, these are the most pronounced tactile bumps so far. Pretty comparable to the shrimps. Definitely more pronounced than the strawberry milks. Definitely more pronounced, although the kiwis aren't too far off. Yeah, the Oreos are pretty close too, but actually, these are pretty close because they have really pronounced bumps on the downstroke and the upstroke. I would say that the feel of the Everglide Oreo bump is the most similar so far to the U4Ts. Let me go back to these. Yeah, this doesn't have as much of a tactile feel on the way up. In comparison to these. Yeah, those aren't too far off. The bump is a little stronger in the U4Ts than in the SP Star Polaris Purples, but they're not super far away. Okay, so those are the tactile switches that I have around the house that I have used for a while, and then I have some that I haven't used in a long time and some that I've only sampled. I haven't actually built full boards with. So let's try some of those. All right, so we have the ones that I've used before in builds but haven't used in a while. These are the Zeal Aqua Zilents. They are silent tactiles. Here's what they sound like. And in terms of a bump comparison, it's not super pronounced. It's definitely obvious, but I wouldn't say it's as thick as some of the others we've had here. Let me see if I can find some good comparisons. Okay, bigger than the bump in the strawberry milks. Not as big as the Oreo bump. Not as big as the SP Star Polaris Purple bump. So it's not quite as strong of a bump, but it is still noticeable. Then we have these. I was so excited to pre-order these. These are Gateron Azure Dragon switches, and they are very cute, and we just don't get to see a lot of multicolored tactiles. That's usually reserved for the linear game, so I was excited to try them, but their bump is not as big as I would like. Here's what they sound like stock. And you might be able to tell that that's pretty high pitched. So when I was using them, I actually did film and lube them all. So here's what they sound like lubed and filmed. Much better sounding when they're lubed and filmed, but they feel even more dull around the bump when you lube them. So I'm going to go back to the stock bump to compare. So the stock bump is pretty... It feels like it starts at the very beginning of the press and like doesn't end. Let's see. I know it's not going to be as pronounced as the shrimps. Yeah, definitely not. Although, you know, about the same, like, it feels like the same weight of spring. Yeah, definitely not as bumpy as the Kiwis. Maybe comparable bump-wise to the SP Star Polaris. But because you have to lube and film them, that or at least if you want them to sound a little better, you should lube and film them, and they don't keep that tactility once you get some lube in there, and so definitely a lot less once they're good to go. And then another cute tactile I couldn't pass up is the Charue Design popcorn. And that's what they sound like stock. Just like a really light bump. It doesn't even really compare to any of the other ones that I've talked about so far. The bump is very light. And we've got 4 more to talk about. These are all new to me. I just have these sample packs. You watched me open onto the desk mat. And so these are the Melon milks. I got them from Dangkeebs. I don't know who else might be selling them, but they are very cute. Nice. I love the color. And I've really only like tested these once. The day that I got them, I brought them to dinner with me. I was heading out to dinner right after work, and I grabbed the package from home and then like opened them at the dinner table at a restaurant and played around with them with my partner, so we could compare our opinions of them. I like this one. Let's see, how does melon milk compare to strawberry milk? Okay, melon milk has a clear bump beginning and end, unlike the strawberry milk. Yeah, kind of similar to the Oreos, but I think there might be long springs in these Oreos, and there's not long springs in the melon milks. Well, let's open them up in a second. I want to compare the strings of these. I'm just going to set them right there for now, and we will open those up and see how the springs compare, because that feels like the biggest difference to me is that the Oreo is snappier on the return, and that usually comes from longer springs in my experience. But let's see what we can see when we open them up. And then we've got these banana milks that I also got from Dangkeebs. They're kind of similar in color to the popcorns, but they have a full yellow as opposed to a half yellow, and this is a much more like pastel yellow as opposed to a brighter yellow. These have very, very little bump at all. If you like light tactiles, these are probably good for you. They're very snappy, very smooth, but very light in terms of the bump. And last 2 here, these are both by Wuque Studios. One is a heavy tactile and the other one is a silent tactile. I think the heavy is the black stem. So let's try that first. Yeah, the bump is okay. I would call it mid. I'm not super impressed. It does have a really interesting shape of a bump. It seems different than others. Maybe I'll open that one up too just to look at the stem. And then this should be the Wuque Silent Tactile. And in terms of the bump compared to the others, okay, definitely a much smaller bump than the Durock shrimps. And in comparison to the Aqua Zilents, a much smaller bump there too. It's definitely noticeable, but not as big a bumps as the other two silent tactiles I have here. Okay, so that is everything in terms of just a quick sound for each one, and then a quick description of the bumps and comparisons to others that are here on the table. I'm going to open these three. We'll compare the couple of things I wanted to compare, and then we'll call it. Okay, I have returned with my switch opener, so let's start opening some switches. Okay. Ooh, this is an extra long spring in the Heavy Tactiles by Wuque Studio, but I wanted to look at them because I wanted to see the stem shape. So these are definitely lubed. And let's see if I can get this to focus. All right, the camera isn't focusing, so I'll just take a picture, a close-up picture, and put it on the video here. But it's not drastically different from other stem shapes that I've seen. Okay, this is fascinating. I'm going to put just a picture image or a couple picture images up on the screen of what I'm looking at because the camera isn't pointing at it or focusing very well. But I feel like this is the opposite of what I hypothesized. I guess I'll have to watch the video back and see. But I think I hypothesized that I'd put long springs in the Everglide Oreos, and that's what was giving them that snappy feel. But they have their stock springs, and I mean, all three of these are stock springs, but the Melon is actually the longest. Well, it's significantly longer than the Oreo, but it's actually the same length as the Wuque Studio Heavy Tactiles. So that's actually really interesting to me. I guess the differences in feel are coming from the differences in the shape of the stem. So I'll be sure to highlight which is which on the screen. But yeah, that was really more out of curiosity than anything, kind of a tangent at the end. We've accomplished our goal of listening to and feeling and describing the bumps on all of these 14 different switches. Let me know if you have any other questions or requests.